In front of you is a 2015 Suzuki V Strom 650, otherwise known as the DL650. Since entering the market in 2004, the 650 Strom is one of the most common bikes out there. But what makes it so great, or not so great? Today we're going to find out. I'll give you a tour of the bike and all its features, we'll go in-depth with the history and specs, and then I'm going to take you along for a ride to show what it's like on the road. I'm Trevor, and you're watching Two Wheelin'. After introducing the 1000cc V Strom in 2002, Suzuki quickly decided to add the smaller 650 version in 2004. Suzuki was really ahead of the times with this, because now midsize adventure bikes are all the rage, but this was not the case 16 years ago when the Strom was released. For example, Yamaha just made the Tenere 700 available in the US, a bike customers begged for the last 10 years. Meanwhile, Suzuki spends their days polishing up the bike they brought to market over 15 years ago. Speaking of this, the bike has undergone some changes throughout the years. There are 3 different generations of the bike. Bikes produced from 2004 to 2011 are Gen 1, 2012 to 2016 are Gen 2, and the current 3rd gen has been produced since the 2017 model year. The upgrades typically involve minor engine changes and a styling refresh. For example, the 2nd gen received a nicer dash, ABS on all bikes, which was previously an option, and lots of small motor changes. The 3rd gen continues this trend, adding traction control and more. The general consensus is that while all 3 generations are very similar, the newer updated models are improved and preferred when possible. If you do decide on a Gen 1 model, however, I'd strongly suggest you search for an ABS-equipped model. In addition to these 3 generations, there are several variants including the SE, Expedition, XT, and more. In front of you is an XT model. Suzuki offers many OEM accessories, often bundled into these variants, like the XT or SE. For example, skid plates, handguards, a center stand, aluminum cases, engine guards, modified seats, and windscreens are all available through Suzuki dealers and included on many of these models. Now for the specs. A lot of this differs between generations, but here is the general situation. The engine is a 650cc V-twin producing horsepower in the mid-60s. Transmission is a 6-speed manual with a wet clutch. All models come standard with fuel injection, and most of these Stroms weigh in just below 500 pounds with the light aluminum frame. The fuel tank is almost 6 gallons and reaches close to a 300-mile range depending on how you ride. MSRP starts at $8,800 for the base model and can reach near $11,000 US for optioned out examples. Don't let this deter you, however, because the Strom has been around for 16 years and counting, so used models can be had for a fraction of the new price. Enough with specs, now it's time to ride the 2015 V Strom 650. The V Strom handles great. The chassis feels planted, easy to lean over with confidence, and well made. I like that I can have fun on this bike without people giving me the death stare that I usually get riding a sport bike. The suspension is good and gets even better on the newer generations. You can easily adjust preload on both the front and back end. They even added this little knob to make rear adjustment painless. I am a huge fan of this little thing. The motor is quite powerful and torquey for a mid-size tourer. Like I said, I don't think you could ever need more power on a bike like this. Overall, it's clear when you ride this bike that Suzuki has it figured out, which is exactly what should happen after 16 years. Nothing on it is all that fancy, but everything works and works well at that. Of course, there are downsides to the Strom. For example, there's no cruise control, and the chain-driven wheel may require more maintenance than a shaft drive bike. While the motor is powerful, I wouldn't call it buttery smooth. This is no match for a parallel twin in terms of comfort, because no matter how much balancing Suzuki does, the motor will always be a V-twin, which is inherently unbalanced. And while the Strom will happily cruise down fire roads and light trails, I can assure you it's not a dual sport. Don't be fooled into thinking this bike will keep up with DRZ 400s, WR250Rs, and the like. Oh, and did I mention the clutch switch is super annoying?
Here is another very small but noticeable pet peeve of mine with the V Strom. If you go to start the bike, you turn on the switch here and you grab the clutch. Nothing happens. You see, there is a clutch switch, but it requires that the clutch be pulled almost all the way in. So if you see, I have it all the way in, and now it starts. The reason that this is annoying to me is because I, like many of you, ride with 2 fingers on the clutch. And if I pull the clutch all the way in to the point where it's hitting my other fingers, it's oftentimes not enough to get this bike to start. See? That feels natural, but it's not starting. In other words, the V Strom requires that you pull the clutch lever so far that it's almost uncomfortable every time you start the motor. That's a very small thing that does irritate me a lot. The only reason I was able to get it started now is because I squeezed my knuckle so hard with the clutch lever that it reached.
As far as pricing, it's neither expensive or cheap in the world of touring bikes. On one hand, a used KLR 650 can be had for half the cost of a Strom, but the Suzuki is a significantly more refined machine. By contrast, a BMW GS could cost twice what a Strom does, so the value of the V Strom is just good, nothing more. All things considered, the Suzuki V Strom 650 is a wonderful bike. It manages to feel comfortable at highway speeds while still being playful in the turns. The V Strom 650 is a sweet spot between heavy boring bikes and nimble underpowered 250s. You could take this bike around the world with somebody on the back seat, or just go for a 20-minute spirited ride. By now, you might be wondering who this bike belongs to. In 2017, my dad and I rented out a pair of 650 Stroms from Surf and Summit Motorcycles in Maine. The owner, Steve, is a wonderful guy and a certified mechanic, so we knew the bikes would be trustworthy. He didn't pay me to say this and doesn't even know that I am, but I would highly recommend checking out Surf and Summit Motorcycles if you want to rent bikes in Maine. We got to spend a weekend riding all around the beautiful state and trying out the Stroms. The Gen 1 bikes happily took us everywhere with plenty of power, comfort, and space. My dad liked the bike so much that when we got home, he actually sold his Super Tenere 1200 and downsized to the bike you see today. It's been here since with no regrets involved. Many people today get on big bikes and forget how much fun riding can be. If this describes you, I would strongly urge you to consider the 650 Strom. It's a very good balance between big bike characteristics without limiting the fun factor. Thanks for watching, ride safe, and I'll see you next time.